Hello, this is a homily for the 8th Sunday of the year, and as you know from the calendar, this is the last Sunday that falls before the opening of the season of Lent. Lent starts next Wednesday with the great feast of Ash Wednesday, and so these readings actually are beautifully appropriate to prepare our minds and hearts for what we are going to experience during Lent, particularly in terms of self-awareness, in terms of reflection on how do I live, what do I do, is what I do, is it salutary, does it bring help and salvation to other people, does it bring me salvation, and then also does it show a life of faith, a life of hope, and a life of charity. So starting with these readings, we have a few lines from the book of Sirach, Sirach 27, and it starts off, when a sieve is shaken, the husks appear. And this really sets the tone for all the readings, because in fact it's a whole lot of examples drawn from the life of a farmer, the life of somebody who prepares and looks after trees, grows them, and so on. And every one of these metaphors is somehow an inspired presentation to us to reflect on ourselves. Talking about the sieve, when the sieve is shaken, the husks appear. You know that the husks are of no use at all, and so they can be thrown away, and the grain that has gone through the sieve is what will give us a clean grain that can then be ground up for flour and made into bread. And very much in the same way, Sirach goes through all of these different kinds of analogies. The potter, when he makes something, it's tested, because when you put it in the furnace, if there's any flaw in it at all, it's going to shatter or crack along that flaw. So in tribulation is the test of the just. We're being prepared to, first of all, look to a life of being one of the just, one of the ones who lives a life of faith, hope, and charity, and at the same time to look at ourselves and see how we measure up. The fruit of the tree shows the care that it has had. So too does one's speech disclose the bent of one's mind. Speech is a very simple test, and when we watch people talking absolute nonsense on television and at rallies and so forth, and something which is not true, not factual, and also not uplifting, it's amazing how vulgar and crude humor can become, simply because these comics and speakers have no imagination and don't have a depth of character which would help them to find much more subtle and jokes that would reach us just as well and be just as amusing. In the psalm then, Psalm 92 that follows it, Lord, it is good to give thanks to you. The psalmist is acknowledging that in fact the Lord is the one who is pulling my life in some kind of direction, giving it some kind of value. It's good to give thanks to the Lord, to proclaim your kindness at dawn and your faithfulness throughout the night. We have this astonishing relationship with God, which is always with us. It constitutes us as human beings. And if we appreciate it, value it, treasure it, and use it, we will grow. We will become more faithful, more hopeful, and more just. The just one shall flourish like the palm tree. They that are planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. Flipping backwards and forwards between the natural imagery of the plants, the trees, and then the supernatural imagery of the house of the Lord, where they will grow in safety, they will grow in fertility, and they will have essentially a long life. They shall bear fruit even in old age, vigorous and sturdy shall they be. And even the fact that we are growing into deeply spiritual beings is an acclamation of just how good and how generous God is. In the second reading, which comes from the first letter to the Corinthians, he gives us more of a spirituality when this which is corruptible clothes itself with incorruptibility, then death will be swallowed up in victory, and so forth. So we have this wonderful transformation of this corrupt and dying nature. Everything gets born, everything dies, and in the midst of this corruption, the Spirit of God is working and transforming those of us who are interested, who are open to this, to become incorruptible. In other words, to live the life of God. And so be steadfast, Paul says, be firm, always devoted to the work of the Lord. This is not simply a certain time that we set aside for doing the work of the Lord. If I'm relating to my wife, taking care of her, being interested in her, that is a work of the Lord. When we are looking after our children, that is a work of the Lord. And in some ways, when they relate to us, they are doing the work of the Lord, affirming us, acknowledging us as persons, and so on. I mean, we could develop a whole spirituality of family here. Ultimately, then, we come to the gospel, which is taken from Luke chapter 6. And again, Jesus has a whole series of these analogies. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye and not perceive the wooden beam in your own? These simple analogies that remind us of the hard truths of life, that really and truly, if we don't have anything to offer, we're not going to be able to lead somebody else. If we have a beam in our own eye, in other words, our sight is completely blocked by this big chunk of wood, we're not going to see the splinter in somebody else's eye. Hypocrisy then would be to say, well, no, there's nothing wrong with my eyes. I can see, and therefore I can criticize my neighbor. Again, a good tree does not bear rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree bear good fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes, nor do they pick grapes from brambles. A good person produces good out of the goodness of his heart. We're getting a kind of a spiritual psychology that is common through the Old Testament and the New, that basically by their fruits you will know them. What they produce is really going to show us what in fact is at the center of their hearts. And as we know, Christianity is a religion of conversion, and so our hearts are meant to be changed. And so these readings give us a set of great challenges that warn us that Lent is going to be challenging, warn us that Lent is going to throw the spotlight on us, on how we relate to people and so forth, not for any nasty reason, but simply so that we grow through the Spirit of God and arrive purified at the Triduum at Easter, when we go through Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday, when we celebrate the Lord's resurrection. The truly transformed life. He was not a sinner, and that's what happened to him when he rose from the dead. And we hopefully are going to get to that point. Thank you.